Welcome back. Just maybe it comes with the territory during a building boom, but it seems to be happening more than usual. In June, 2 construction workers were rescued after a platform broke 14 stories high at the site of the new View condominiums. Earlier this month, another construction worker was plucked off of a broken scaffolding on the other side of another high-rise building over Palm Avenue. Coincidence or an indication of safety issues as Sarasota skyline grows before our very eyes? And joining us is David Simmons, who has 25 years of experience in construction safety issues, and Cindy Long, a property manager in the building right next door to the scene of one of those construction accidents. And Cindy, let me ask you, that fateful day, what did you experience?
It was extremely scary. It was scary for the residents that were outside watching. It was scary for everyone, and mostly it's scary for the construction worker. I mean, your fear for anybody is not to get hurt. And to see that and see him hanging there was extremely, it was very heart-wrenching to watch that.
I would imagine you brought along with you today a hard hat and a mask,
yes,
which lends me to think that you had concerns before this incident took place.
Of course. Of course, we've had a lot of falling debris in the past year, and it has become to the issue that, like you saw, the danger on the door. I try to protect my residents and my owners as much as possible, and always tell them to look up as soon as they walk out. Things are falling.
David, is that unusual?
Yes, it is, in a sense that the contractor has a responsibility to contain that, okay? And in terms of falling off the building, there's ways of doing that with either debris nets or the rest of it. They do need to control that somehow. Depending on the height of the building and the proximity to the structures next door, it can be a serious problem. It truly is.
And as I asked at the outset, is this just coincidence that we had 2 accidents like this within basically a month's period of time, or is that also unusual?
I think it's very unusual. Okay, the subcontractors or the contractor that uses that swing stage, they have to train their people per the OSHA standards. They have to inspect that equipment before they use it. Why it happened, I couldn't tell you. I have not been involved on that. But there is a path to follow, a certain planning process in order to inspect the gear, and if mechanically it fails, I'm not sure if that's within the realm of those guys.
Whose responsibility is it to hold contractors responsible in terms of making sure that their work sites are safe?
It's an OSHA requirement. They have to provide a safe work site, a site that's free of recognized and potential hazards.
Cindy, I want to get into what many residents are trying to do in terms of approaching the city, because the city is the one who
absolutely
does the permits. The permits. I want to get into that in the next segment.
Absolutely.
But it's safe to say that you and residents have been concerned and trying to get
we've been concerned since the original of the house. The 2 houses that were purchased went down, one which had asbestos. So we've been concerned since the very beginning and have asked for the help. To help the citizens from the city. Obviously, we're not getting it.
Well, and
we'll go into that later.
Right. Just give me a sense, because you are right next to the location at 624.
Exactly.
Is it something that weighs on you and the residents there on a daily basis?
It's a 24/7 job now. And I would say 80% of my job now is the safety of the residents, which is difficult to do the other job that you were hired for.
Now, David, I would imagine this. I just got back from New York City. There you look, everywhere something is going up around there. So, a booming skyline is a sign of an improving economy. But in many places, do many communities do a good job in terms of making sure that contractors are taking the precautions that they should be taking?
In terms of property damage to somebody else, I'm not sure of that. I can tell you that OSHA has specific requirements to keep that project safe that the contractors, all employers have to follow, for that matter.
All
okay.
Right. We are just getting started with our conversation, and we'll have more right after we check the weather, so stay with us. Welcome back. The skyline is growing in Sarasota, and lately so have been the number of construction accidents. Earlier this month, a construction worker had to be plucked off of a broken platform in a daring rescue 10 stories above Sarasota. In June, 2 construction workers were rescued after another platform broke 14 stories above the new View condominiums. And joining us is construction safety expert David Simmons. and property manager Cindy Long. And David, let me start with you. When you look at these two incidents involving scaffolding and platforms high above the buildings, what kind of questions does it raise with you?
Well, certainly it's unusual to have two in such a short period of time. The OSHA standards require the user of that scaffold, that subcontractor, to inspect the scaffold daily before use. Their people have to be trained, and obviously they were trained in a sense because they were wearing their gear, and that's what saved their lives. Otherwise, it would have been a lot worse. But they have to look at that scaffold pretty hard. There's a certain amount of training that goes into that, and it is. I have not seen too many.
I mean, I realize accidents can happen, but if inspectors were indeed inspecting the scaffolding, and if there were problems that were not caught, what does that say?
Well, it goes back to what they're actually inspecting, and the competent person for that subcontractor has to get into it in terms of not only lifelines but the setup itself. Now, mechanically inside the motor, whatever failed, I couldn't tell you that, and I'm sure they couldn't either. It seems to me it's more of a visual inspection than anything else, versus actually opening up that motor to see if there's a problem with it.
And just to be clear, when you say inspection, who is doing these inspections itself? The construction company, or are they hiring private companies to do that?
It could be either one. Usually it is the subcontractor that's using the scaffold itself. They have to have a competent person, a person that's trained in recognizing the hazards associated with whatever task they're doing, and being able to anticipate any potential problems. And so that person has to inspect it and document it daily. And then the workers that actually go on the scaffold have to be trained on how to use that scaffold, how to use the fall protection gear.
Now, Cindy, we started the conversation in the last half hour talking about the fact that, in fact, I called the city of Sarasota today, and they said primarily oversight on these projects is an OSHA responsibility, a federal responsibility, that the city itself does not have a lot of oversight responsibilities and regulations that...
Of course not.
But you're not buying that?
No, I'm not buying it at all. Who gives the permits? Who starts this process? Starts with the city. And it should end with the city's inspections. Where is the city at all times with this going on?
So what have you done?
We have gone to the city so many numerous times asking for our protections, and I'm sure he's going to agree with me on this. We asked for netting from day one. We were promised netting from the developer, that we definitely would be netted and protected. We went to the city and they just said, of course you will be. You know, no doubt, we're here to protect the citizens. We didn't get it.
Is netting a requirement?
It is, yes it is, in a sense that you have to control falling objects on the project to protect the workers on the site. In this case, the proximity appears to be, obviously, is pretty close to your structure. But
Let's
you
call
have
it lot line to lot line, zero lot line.
Okay, but you know, they do have to protect the workers on the ground from falling objects, and that's where netting comes in.
Cindy, have you approached members of the city commission to come out and look at what the situation is
We
there?
have from day one, especially when the ground collapsed. When they began their digging, excavating, the ground collapsed. Finally, Marlon Brown came out. Brown came out, and he was of help to us. We were getting help from Susan Chapman. We were not receiving much help from the other commissioners at that time. We now have a commissioner on staff, which is Jen, which has been very helpful.
Jen Ahern.
Exactly, and she's been of great help. Susan Chapman was the first one to help us. Everybody stepped away and said, oh, that's a shame, sorry. That's not right. But no one shows. Back up. You keep calling, and no one shows to help us. So we continue to go down there. Continue.
David, is this in itself unusual in the construction business?
Is what unusual?
Is that these projects sometimes result in neighboring communities having these kind of complaints, whether it's concern about scaffolding or items falling off of construction sites, and local folks, whether it's property managers like Cindy or residents, really kind of feeling that they have no place to turn?
Well, most of the developers I've worked with, and this one that I've worked with has been very responsive when I've been on that project. But usually what happens is there are things that are going to fall. You got noise problems. You're going to have a certain amount of that. You're going to have overspray sometimes. If they're doing any kind of stucco work, if they're spraying, or any kind of paint work, or something to that effect. And generally it's handled, by the contractor itself. On this particular situation, the way you've described the continuing problems, I can't answer that per se, but I can tell you from the OSHA standpoint is that, you got falling objects, you have to protect the people on the ground, the guys on the ground that are working. They have no say per se on the public.
Right, it's lot line to lot line, it's our issue.
Right.
What ability does OSHA have to actually take action? And I mean that by a manpower question. Do they have enough inspectors out there who are coming out, enough resources? We know budgets are tight, especially the federal budget these days.
Right now, with the boom in construction in Florida, OSHA is extremely busy. Now, I can't speak for their situation, but I know they're extremely busy. So far in Florida, there have been over 75 fatalities. Okay, of those, there's been 28 of them at least related to falls, and so OSHA is extremely busy right now. Whether they have the funding or the personnel, that's something you'd have to ask them. But the people that I've run into, they're running pretty hard. They really are trying to keep up with complaints and any kind of fatalities or near misses that happen.
And I would imagine if any workforce is working that hard and is so stretched that things can fall through the cracks.
Oh, sure, absolutely. But again, the employer is required, by the OSHA standards to train their people in the tasks that they're going to perform. Okay, so whether you're painting or you're hanging drywall or you're working off a scaffold, that employer needs to get in there and train their people and make sure they continue with that training.
But we're both in agreement of netting should be required.
If there's a falling object problem, yeah,
yes.
they will do that.
Cindy, given the fact that you are underwhelmed in terms
yes.
of the city's response to your concerns, yes. have you gone to OSHA? Have you explored what kind of options and
we have
things
called
that you
OSHA in the beginning when things were falling down severely. OSHA informed us it wasn't an issue that they could help us with. They're more geared towards the employees of the site, not for residents not on the site. I don't know how true that is, but we were shut down immediately. So I'm not quite sure. I just know we didn't have a chance. So again, back to the city we go.
Now, obviously, this is an issue that will eventually go away when the building is completed.
Will it?
Well, I mean, so what
for
kind
us?
Yes.
Yes. For the other ones coming, if they keep doing lot line to lot line, zero setbacks, no.
And are there enough private firms out there that to be hired by the general contractors to do these kinds of inspections?
The larger contractors usually have a safety person on staff. It's the mid to smaller size will utilize either a safety consultant. They might have somebody part-time come in. There's lots of resources out there. University of South Florida in Tampa, for instance, is an OSHA outreach center, and the contractor of any size can sign up with those folks up there, and they will help them put together a safety program and actually will do site inspections for that particular member.
The obvious question also is, in terms of, OSHA is supposed to protect worker safety. I know a lot of these trades are unionized. Are the unions out there trying to make sure that their workers are adequately protected? Well,
I can't speak to the unions too well because I don't deal with too many unions, but the few folks that I have worked with, they're very safety conscious, along with, nobody wants their guys to get hurt on the job site. It's a matter of getting our people, getting a safety culture developed so that these people, want to work safely. It's a risk versus reward scenario with them. They think that if they do take that chance and work unsafe, that it's going to please the boss or make the project move that much faster or get the concrete poured that day. And so the goal is to get our guys trained and turned around so we change that culture. And you do that through not only training, but just, good planning, that type of thing. And there's a lot of different organizations you can work with.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, time for final thoughts from our guests, so stay with us. What should we make of the accidents this summer high above booming Sarasota skyline? Do we need some new regulations to maintain safety? Our guests join us right now for final thoughts. And Cindy, I'll start with you because it seems like if you're not getting much help out of the city itself,
correct,
where do you go?
I don't know. I keep trying. I mean, I go on to every organization I possibly can to say, help us. Please help us. This is ridiculous. The city, when going in front of the commissioners, and I'll say it again, I've asked that their only job is to protect the citizens, and they're not doing a very good job at that. And we've been asking for it for years. Netting would have been huge. Would have been very grateful for that. But where are they? And it needs to change. It might not change for us, but there's ones coming around the corner and I hope it changes for them. They need to change the codes.
You know, the one thing that we have not mentioned so far in this conversation is what role, if any, the state has. What would the answer to that be?
Well, good question. Years ago, the state of Florida had a safety division, so to speak, and that was disbanded for whatever reason. And then that was
By whom?
by the governor at the time.
Who was?
I think it might have been Governor Martinez. I'm not sure. But the point is that that function was then moved over to the University of South Florida in Tampa as part of the OSHA outreach program. Okay, so they're funded to help all employers, not just contractors, provide a safe work site for their employees. Okay, and to help with training and resources for whether it be safety training or come out and inspect or possibly even some testing. But those outlets are there. The insurance companies, workers' comp carriers also provide site inspections that can assist the contractor in that way. But in terms of the state, it's pretty much been removed years ago.
You mentioned the insurance companies. Obviously, they have a tremendous amount to lose if somebody gets hurt. So I would imagine that they would be pushing for as much safety, regulations as they can.
Yeah, they do. I mean, it's a business to them naturally, but the insurance workers' comp carriers that I've worked with, their loss control people are very good, very well trained, and they do their site inspections, but it may not be as often as what somebody like myself.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you both
Thanks
for
for
joining
having
us
us.
tonight. Before we go, we also want to share with you what some of our viewers are saying about Friday's show. Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly is now Chief of Staff to the White House. The four-star general replaced Reince Priebus after Priebus resigned last week. It is just one of many adjustments in staffing since President Trump took office earlier this year. And here's what some of your comments on the constant turnover at the White House. Lori on Facebook asks, has any other president had so many staff upheavals in such a short period of time? Myrner asks, seems to me if one has to change personnel so often, they didn't make good decisions in the first place. And finally, Matthew says White House has higher turnover than McDonald's. Well, if you'd like to join the conversation on tonight's topic, just visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/news@7. And FYI, you can watch past discussions. They're on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku.